Chapter 3. Sinister Carvings. Jean Dana lay dazed from the fall. Jubilee struggled out of the hole into which her right front leg had stumbled. In a few seconds, Louise, who had dropped the pack horse's lead rope, ground hitching it, raced up. She dismounted and leaned over her sister. Jean! Jean! How do you feel? Jean opened her eyes, blinked, and then managed a faint smile. I'm all right, I guess, she said, sitting up slowly. Then, recalling what had happened, she asked anxiously, How's Jubilee? Oh, I hope she didn't break a leg. She got up and the two girls walked over to the horse. Jean hugged Jubilee. Don't worry, she said soothingly. I'm not angry. The accident wasn't your fault. Oh, I only hope you're all right. Louise led the mare around and watched the horse's legs as she walked. Jubilee's limping only a little, Louise said finally. I guess she isn't badly hurt. Thank goodness, said Jean, relieved. Just the same, I'll walk her in. Oh, no, you don't, Louise said firmly. You had a mean tumble. You ride Ginger, and I'll lead Jubilee back to the ranch. Jean did not object. She now gazed at the hole into which her horse had stepped. Some animal made that, I suppose, she remarked. Louise helped her sister climb into Ginger's saddle. The girls watched carefully for further holes and arrived safely at the ranch house. Mr. Strong came out to meet them. When the rancher heard what had happened, he examined Jubilee's leg thoroughly. Some liniment will soon fix that up, he said, relieved. We'll let the horse rest for a day, and she'll be as good as ever. When the Dana's baggage had been unloaded from the pack horse, Aunt Harriet insisted that Jean take it easy. Her niece agreed reluctantly, but hated to give up the search for Baron. Maybe he'll come back tonight, Louise said encouragingly. During supper, which consisted of a delicious lamb stew and freshly baked applesauce cake with vanilla sauce, Mr. Strong said, If Baron doesn't come back here by tomorrow morning, how would you girls like to go with me on a day's hunt for him? That would be terrific, Jean said enthusiastically. Louise smiled. You know I'd love to, but can you spare the time? The rancher gave a hearty laugh. I'll take time. This is an important assignment, isn't it? He asked. We think so, Louise replied. Talk turned again to the Witch of Lost Lake. What does she look like? Jean asked. We've never seen her, Mrs. Strong replied. But we understand she has long gray hair. She always wears men's clothes and hats, so you can imagine what a strange picture she makes when she goes to town. I feel very sorry for her, Louise murmured. It was decided that Mr. Strong and the girls would start off early the next morning and take a lunch with them. By 10 o'clock that night, everyone was sound asleep. Although the Danas slept well, they did awaken several times during the night, hoping that some sound they had heard might be the whine or bark of the missing German shepherd dog. But the sun arose without a visit from Baron. When breakfast was over, the girls dressed for the trip and went out to the corral. Mr. Strong had 3 horses saddled, a Tennessee walker named Rondi for Jean, Ginger for Louise, and his white-nosed bay quarter horse. Lunches were put into the saddlebags, and the 3 riders mounted. The friendly ranch dog whined and danced around. Mr. Strong smiled. Sorry, Eleanor, he said, but we can't take you this time. You're a good detective, though. Keep that nose of yours sniffing for any sign of Baron. He and the girls waved goodbye to Aunt Harriet and Mrs. Strong, then started off. It was easy to follow Baron's tracks in the patches of light snow that lay scattered on the rolling landscape. The riders went on and on over grazing land, through wooded areas where golden aspen leaves danced in the sun, and in and out of glacier-gouged canyons with colorful, candy-striped cliffs. About an hour later, the riders reached a wind-swept canyon bench. Here there was no snow, and the tracks disappeared completely. "Now what are we going to do?" Louise asked in disappointment. "We could skirt this bench, I suppose," said Mr. Strong, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "It will take a long time, though. Too long to try today. As long as we're here, I suggest you investigate a very interesting cave. It's not far." "You mean the formation is interesting?" Jean asked. "No, it's what is inside. The Indians left some petroglyphs on the cave walls. They're kind of amusing and instructive." "Did the Indians of this territory do much carving in stone?" Louise inquired. "A good bit, yes," Mr. Strong replied. "They also painted pictographs by using paint made from ochre. Of course, the petroglyphs chipped from the stone are far better preserved." It took almost 2 hours to reach the cave, and Jean thought in amusement, these western side trips would just about cover a small state back east. The riders dismounted and ground-hitched their horses. Mr. Strong led the way into the wide-mouthed cave. As he entered, the rancher turned on a powerful flashlight which he had taken from his saddlebag. "What a sight!" Louise cried out. "It's fantastic!" Jean exclaimed. The rock walls were covered with figures, most of them about half the size of the person or animal which each represented. Mr. Strong focused his flashlight on a group of mountain goats and antelope. Near them were 2 stalking hunters. With a grin, the rancher remarked, "I'd say those ancient Indians ate well." "Yes, and were also cruel fighters," Louise observed, pausing before a fierce-looking warrior. "Here's a funny one," Jean pointed out as Mr. Strong played the beam of the flashlight along the cave walls. "This fellow must have been an ancient astronaut." Rising from the head of the man were 3 narrow lines that looked like antennas. At the top of one of these was a circle resembling a balloon. "I wonder how far he could fly," Louise said, giggling. "This figure might represent an ancient god," said Mr. Strong. "As you probably know, there are all sorts of legends about Indian gods that came to them from space or from across the water." "Then you think this one might be arriving from some other planet?" Louise asked. "Yes." Mr. Strong turned and beamed his light on the wall near the left side of the entrance. The sightseers stared in astonishment. Chipped out of the rock was the figure of an elderly woman with long hair. She was leaning over, as if about to pick up something from the ground. "That's new!" cried Mr. Strong in amazement. "It wasn't here the last time I visited this cave." "Do you suppose," Louise asked excitedly, "that it's meant to portray the Witch of Lost Lake?" Before the rancher could answer her, his flashlight revealed another recently carved figure which had been chipped a short distance from the woman. It was crudely done, probably because the sculptor's tool had been broken. Part of it lay on the ground. The scene depicted a man with a shovel sneaking up behind the woman as if about to strike her. "How gruesome!" Jean exclaimed. Mr. Strong's brow furrowed. "I agree," he said. "This must have been done as a joke by someone with a warped sense of humor." "I wonder," Jean thought. Louise now discovered that back of the man with the shovel was a crudely carved arrow which pointed directly toward the scene. On a sudden hunch, she asked the rancher, "In what direction of the compass does that arrow point?" "Straight south," said Mr. Strong, "toward Lost Lake. I think your hunch about this newly made petroglyph representing the witch may be true." Instantly, Louise became worried. "Then the witch may be in danger," she said. "This scene might have been chipped here as a message to someone who intends to harm her." Both Mr. Strong and Jean agreed, and Louise urged eagerly, "Let's leave at once and try to find out." The rancher shook his head. "I'd like to," he said, "but I must be home by 6 o'clock for an important appointment with a sheep buyer. It would be a fast, hard-riding, 2-day round trip to Lost Lake for a cowboy, but too rough for you girls to undertake in that time." Seeing the disappointed looks on the Dana's faces, he added quickly, "I'll tell you what, if Barron isn't back by day after tomorrow, I'll take you to Lost Lake." "That would be wonderful," Jean exclaimed, smiling again. Louise added her thanks, and with a twinkle in her eyes, said that even if Barron did return, she still would like to take the ride and meet the Witch of Lost Lake. "Leaving a mystery unsolved always bothers me," she added. By this time, the trio was hungry and decided to eat lunch while the horses were resting and grazing on the sage grass. Jean was the first to finish, and she began exploring the gorge on foot. Presently, from a distance, she called excitedly, "I've just found dog tracks!" Eagerly, Louise and Mr. Strong hurried forward. As they reached Jean's side, she said, "These prints certainly look like Barron's, but something about them seems different." Mr. Strong examined the tracks, then said, "That's because the dog was running on 3 legs. He must have injured one paw." "Poor Barron," said Louise, but added hopefully, "This might mean he didn't go far beyond here. Now maybe we'll find him." She began calling his name, but the dog did not respond. "We'd better get the horses and make a search," Mr. Strong suggested. "No telling how far these tracks may lead." The riders returned to their mounts and climbed into the saddles. It was not difficult to pick up the tracks of the limping dog. Suddenly, Mr. Strong, in the lead, reined up sharply. "Listen!" he exclaimed. A short distance ahead, they saw a box canyon. From it came the sounds of many dogs snarling and yapping. The Danas were horrified. Had Barron become mixed up with a pack of wild dogs and gotten into a fight with them? "Let's hurry," Jean urged. "We'd better ride up the slope and look down to see what's going on," the rancher advised. "Wild dogs sure shouldn't be met head-on." The Danas, extremely worried, obeyed and urged their mounts up the rocky bluff. End of chapter 3.